us now. Only love.
Good evening and welcome to Moving Forward, a production of the Bain Grandstand Advancement Association. On this program, we seek to identify obstacles in the progress of our wonderful nation. And with the help of in-studio guests and those of you who are out there, we try to address these obstacles with a view to eliminating them or at least reducing them so that this nation can move forward. Last week we had a wonderful panel talking about majority rule, and we just scratched the surface, and so we had invited them back. And as tomorrow is Majority Rule Day, we wish to extend happy Majority Rule greetings to all of you who are watching us this evening. We trust that you have a beautiful day tomorrow. As we get on with the program, let me introduce our distinguished guests. We have with us once again Dr. ChrisCurry, professor at the University of the Bahamas in history, and he is knowledgeable. Accompanying us also is Mr. Fred Munnings, an executive in the labor movement, and he is going to contribute from the aspect of the labor's contribution to majority rule, which is significant, perhaps as great as any other sector. And so as we get on with the program, once again, we wish to thank you in advance for taking some of your precious time this evening to be with us, and I promise you it's going to be good. We have been talking about Majority Rule Day as if that is a single event on January 10th, which in fact it isn't. Majority Rule Day is a stop along the way. Because once the people of this country, the masses, found themselves enslaved, there was the move, initially maybe just in mind, because we did not have the physical ability to change the situation. But from the moment they were enslaved, they were fighting for freedom. And that fight, of course, intensified and was escalated along the way, culminating in the Majority Rule Day victory on January 10th, 1967. We somehow stopped there, or perhaps we paused too long, because we have to move on this march. This is a long march to freedom. And in our opinion, we are not there yet. So having laid the framework for our discussions, we're going to start with Dr. Curry to give us the historical perspective, starting way back from the beginning of the involvement of black people in this country. And then Fred is going to bring in the labor component, because there have been some misdirection of the narrative on majority rule. A number of important individuals and important entities are being either omitted or diminished. And we want to set the record straight. And so we're going to ask these two gentlemen who are eminently qualified to get us on the right track.
So good to be able to come on your show once again, and I want to say good evening on this eve of Majority Rule to the listening public. I want to do something a little odd. I want to do it retroactively. I want to start from January 10th and move backwards. You could conceivably look in the shallow way of thinking about Majority Rule as a singular event that happened on January 10th. 1967, on the Friday when they had the general elections. There was a tie between the UBP and, of course, the PLP 1818. You had an independent candidate in Alvin Brennan who actually had detached himself from the UBP and ran as an independent candidate in North Eleuthera. And then you had the Labour Party leader, and some people erroneously think that Randall Fox was independent. He was not independent. He was the leader of the Labour Party. And so those two individuals aligned with the PLP to break the tie, and by Monday, after the weekend, they were able to form the government of the Bahamas and therefore end minority rule. But that is just a small smidgen, a slice of the much bigger pie that we want to look at. You could drill back and you could argue that majority rule was in fact a period between 1962 and 1967, when you had a concerted effort on the part of the Progressive Liberal Party after they won the popular vote but lost the general election of 1962. And so they purposely organized themselves in an international and local campaign for electoral reform. This is a period of electoral reform. They go to the United Nations and other places, and they expose the corruption and gerrymandering of the UBP. How is it that in 62 you could have an election where you only have 8 constituencies in New Providence, and yet 70% of the Bahamian population reside in New Providence? Makes no sense. And again, they also wanted to abolish the plural vote, whereas individuals, if they own property in various constituencies, could vote multiple times. The company vote had already been abolished, but now they were trying to get rid of the plural vote. So 62 to 67 is this campaign for one man, one vote. But let's be serious though. We can take it a little further back. We can expand the horizon, the window of historical analysis, and say the majority rule period is actually a wider process that began in 1942 with the Burma Road riot, where workers, Bahamian workers, were being paid half of what American workers were being paid by the Pleasantville Company, leading to agitation and, of course, the Burma Road riot. And again, we can also include in that framework the formation of the PLP in 1953, the women's suffrage movement. We can include the anti-discriminatory resolution that was tabled in the House of Assembly in 1956 by Eddy and DePuch. All of those events then are marked between 42 and 67. But I said, no, we must go back further. I say we must go back to the abolition of slavery. Yes. Because in 1834, you were given freedom, but you were not given equality if you were a black person in the Bahamas. Right. Yeah. What you got was paper freedom that said, I'm a free man, but you had no access to land. You could not vote if you did not have land, property. You had no civil liberties. You could not sit on a jury. You could not participate as an elected official, therefore, and you could not do things that you would normally associate with citizenship rights. And so I'm saying to you that we have to look at the big picture. As the French historians say, the longue durée, the long process of going from being abolishing slavery and being free men but not being equal. So really what we see in the majority rule movement is the agitation for rights, a civil rights movement, because equality was deferred or aborted in 1834. And so what was deferred had to now be conferred in 1967.
Well, in fact, we can go even further back, because until the 18th century, the majority population in the Bahamas were European, were white.
Right, it wasn't until the Loyalists arrived after 1783, right.
And from that point, the fight for majority rule started.
Right.
From that point. And so the fight always was there. Some of it was muted for various reasons.
Yeah.
Some of it was more expressive, but the fight was always there.
Enslaved persons were always declaring a war on slavery whenever they had a chance.
The minute enslavement occurs,
yes, absolutely,
the fight begins for freedom, because God has just placed that strong desire in each of us to be free. And that is why God himself, though he made us with assistance from no one or anything, he still gave us complete freedom, moral freedom over our actions.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, prevents us from voluntarily submitting ourselves to enslavement. So I believe that we were always, the black people were always on that long march for freedom. And as you said, 42 was when it really became intensive.
Yeah.
From the Burma Road riot. Because then, not only were they now fighting from a local perspective, but they had a glimpse of what happened in the United States through the co-workers on the base.
Right.
They began to realize, you know, things don't have to be this way.
Right. And the Burma Road riot was a perfect storm, so to speak, because it was both a race issue,
and an economic issue as well.
It was an economic issue, and it was a labor issue.
That's right.
So, and I will say also, and I know Freddie, you'll talk a little more about that. So BFL had already been formed, and Charles Rodriguez was the leader at that time in 42.
Yes.
And they had petitioned the government, and the government absolutely ignored their petitions, and so they had to step it up and take it to another level. But labor was involved. You also had some of these middle-class educated black lawyers
Yes.
like A.F. Adderley, R.M. Bailey, C.R. Walker, who was a medical doctor, who were also agitating, but their demands were not the same
You see,
as the laborers. And that's
No.
why I would say it's also a class issue.
they were fighting, but they were fighting more within the system. You see, the laborers, they were fighting within the system.
Perfectly said, perfectly said.
But as we know, to break out of a diabolical system, you can't fight it within.
Yeah.
You have to just crash the barriers and break out. That's where the workers, the man on the street,
Yeah.
and that's why we cannot overlook his contribution and just credit, the political directorate
Yes.
with bringing this freedom about. It was the man on the street. He took the risks. He fought the pitched battles on the street. See, the Burma Road riot was not a bloodless riot.
No.
Blood was shed,
Yes.
and it was shed from the workers, the man on the street. And so we must compliment the workers. Whenever you talk about majority rule or the ascension of the Progressive Liberal Party, they were just at the front of the progressive movement. This was a big movement, and that movement was being fueled by the workers. That's where Freddie and them come in.
Well, first of all, Reverend Dr. Moss, it's a pleasure to be with you once again, always to talk about issues of national importance, particularly as it relates to workers. And what a pleasure it is to be on the same panel with my esteemed brother and friend, Dr. ChrisCurry. But I know you're getting ready to go to a break, but just quickly, I want to take the doctor back even further. Because when Christopher Columbus came, the first thing he did was to enslave and oppress the inhabitants of this nation we now call the Bahamas, in the Lucayan, Arawak Indians, Latinos. First thing they do was to put them to work and enslave them to try to go dig for diamonds that they hardly found in Hispaniola. So it was always centered around economics and labor.
Yeah.
And so we start there. In the New World, we can then move forward, and we want to talk about Pompeii and poor Black Kate and,
Yes, yes.
and Black Dick and all of these historic stories that centered around the oppression of our people, and particularly based on how they were forced to labor in vain without any remuneration to themselves and their families.
We're going to pick that up upon our return from this very short break, so folks, don't go away. We'll be right back.
Only love can save us now.